Today, we're diving deep into something crucial for anyone in DeFi, yield stacking. We're going to uncover why that big, juicy APY number you see on your dashboard might be totally misleading. So you see a vault promising 22% APY, right? Well, that single number is actually a blend of three distinct yield sources. Each layer has its own risks, its own lifespan, and its own compounding behavior. If you don't break down this number, you're almost certainly going to earn less than you expect. We're talking about base lending, protocol token emissions, and temporary campaign rewards. Before we go further, let's clear up a common confusion: APR versus APY. Dashboards love to show APY because it's always the bigger number, but this can be a real illusion. APR is your simple annual rate, while APY includes the magic of compounding. But here's the catch: many bonus rewards in DeFi don't auto-compound. This means your real return is often closer to the APR, so always convert to the same metric before comparing across platforms. This brings us to layer one, the base lending yield. This is the only truly real yield in DeFi. It comes from actual borrowing demand on protocols like Aave or Morpho. This yield fluctuates with market demand, not some promotional budget. It's the floor, the foundation, and it's there whether or not any bonus programs are running. This is the persistent yield, unlike the next layer we're about to discuss. Next up, layer two, protocol token emissions. This is where protocols distribute their own tokens to depositors, adding to your yield. But here's the thing: this layer has a fixed budget and it dilutes over time. As more capital flows into the vault, the yield from these emissions drops. Early movers often benefit the most. And if the token hasn't even launched yet, that displayed yield is based on pure speculation. This layer is less stable than base yield, and it's definitely not the last piece of the puzzle. Now let's hit layer three, campaign rewards. These are the flashiest, but they're also the most fleeting. They're designed to grab your attention, but they won't last. These campaigns are super targeted, often with specific rules about who qualifies. They're also the biggest reason that headline APY looks so good. But here's the kicker: they have an expiration date. When that campaign ends, that big chunk of your blended APY just vanishes. So always check the end date before you jump in. This layer is the first to disappear, and it's usually the largest part of that inflated number. This leads us right into the blended APY trap. This is where the rubber meets the road. That single juicy 22% APY you see on your dashboard, it's a total illusion. It's a blend of all three layers we just discussed. You might think you're getting 22%, but in reality, it could be 3% base, 7% emissions, and a whopping 12% from a campaign that ends next week. The base layer keeps going as long as there's demand. The emissions layer lasts until the protocol runs out of tokens. But that campaign layer, poof, it's gone. Depositing for 22% and ending up with 10% is a common and frustrating DeFi experience. So how do these campaigns even happen? Let's talk about the platforms that power them. So who's behind these layer two and layer three yields? It's platforms like Merkle and Turtle. These aren't just aggregators. They're the infrastructure that lets protocols create these incentive campaigns. Merkle, for example, has distributed over $200 million in incentives across tons of chains. Turtle has handled billions in liquidity, even attracting big institutional players. These platforms are actually creating new yield opportunities that wouldn't exist otherwise. They're different from yield aggregators, which just optimize existing yields. These are about generating new ones. But how do you actually verify all this before you commit your capital? That's next. All right, so you know the layers, you know the platforms. Now, how do you actually verify this stuff before you deposit? It's crucial to do your homework. First, check the base rate directly on the lending protocol, like Aave or Morpho. That's your layer one. Then head over to platforms like Merkle. They'll show you active campaigns, how much time is left, and the budget. Turtle's Earn tab can also break down base versus bonus yields. And for a broader view, DeFi Llama tracks base yields across protocols. If you can't find an end date for a campaign, that's a huge red flag. Investigate before you deposit. This brings us to our key takeaways. So what's the big picture here? Don't just chase the headline APY. You've got to read the yield. Always break down that blended APY into its three components: base, emissions, and campaign. Make sure you're comparing apples to apples by converting APR and APY to the same metric. And remember, that highest yielding campaign layer is the first to expire. Use tools like DeFi Llama, Merkle, and the protocol dashboards to verify each layer independently. Look, all DeFi has risk. This isn't financial advice, but it is crucial education. Understand what you're getting into, and you'll be much better off.
You know, if you've ever been scrolling through DeFi and seen one of those wild triple-digit APYs that just looks way too good to be true, well, your gut was probably right. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on something called yield stacking and show you what's really going on behind those massive numbers. So, imagine this. You see a vault, and it's promising a super juicy 22% APY. It's pretty tempting, right? But the big question is that the return you're actually going to get? The short answer? Almost definitely not. And the reason why? Well, that's what this whole explainer's about. So here's the secret. That single 22% number, it isn't just one thing. It's a mix, a blend of three totally separate layers all stacked on top of each other. Each one has its own risks, its own timeline, its own rules. So don't think of it like a solid block of gold. Think of it more like a dessert. Yeah, a yield parfait. It's the perfect way to think about it. You've got all these different layers, and if you want to know what you're really getting into, you have to look at each one by itself. So let's grab a spoon and start deconstructing this thing layer by layer. But first, hang on, one really quick but super crucial point. APR versus APY. You'll notice dashboards just love to show you the APY. Why? Because it includes compounding, so it's always a bigger, sexier number. But here's the catch. A lot of these rewards don't auto-compound. You have to go in and do it yourself, and that costs gas fees. So your real return is often much closer to the simple APR. Always compare apples to apples. All right, let's start at the very top of our parfait with Layer 3, the sprinkles. These are your temporary campaign rewards. They're designed to be flashy, to grab your attention, and honestly, they often make up the biggest slice of that headline number. But see that hourglass? They're temporary. They might last a few weeks, maybe even just a few days. And when that campaign is over, poof, that part of your yield is just gone.
Okay, let's move down to the next layer, the fruit. This is Layer 2, the protocol's own token emissions. So a project might give out its own token to get people to deposit money. It's a real reward for sure, but as this funnel shows perfectly, that rate dilutes. As more and more people pile into the vault, that same amount of fruit gets split among way more people, so everyone's individual slice just gets smaller and smaller over time.
And finally, we get down to the foundation, Layer 1. This is the base lending yield. Now this is the only truly real, sustainable yield in the whole stack. It comes from actual market demand. You know, people on protocols like Aave actually borrowing money and paying interest on it. This is the bedrock. It's the part that's still there long after all the fancy promotions have dried up. So now that we know the three layers, you got the foundation, the fruit, and the sprinkles, let's look at how they all get blended together to set a very common trap. You see this number. It's clean, it's simple, and it is very tempting. This is the number that gets you to click that deposit button. But this number, it's hiding the real story. And this right here, this chart shows the reality. That 22% is actually a super fragile stack. Look at that. The biggest piece, 12%, is from a campaign that could literally end next week. The next 7% is from emissions that are just going to shrink as more people join. And the only part that's going to stick around long-term is that tiny little 3% base yield at the bottom. The whole illusion is promising you the entire bar, when in reality, the top 2/3 are designed to just melt away. And this leads to what is probably the most common disappointment in all of DeFi. You deposit, expecting that huge number, and a week later you check in and your real earnings are less than half of what they advertised. It's super frustrating, but it's totally avoidable if you know what you're looking for. Okay, so let's shift from the problem to the solution. How do you become a DeFi detective? How do you actually spot the truth before you put your money in? Well, it's actually pretty straightforward once you have the right toolkit. Here it is, your 4-step yield check. It's super simple. First, find that base yield, the foundation. Step 2, hunt down the campaign end date. And hey, if you can't find one, that's a massive red flag. Third, understand the emissions. How much are they giving out and for how long? And finally, like we said before, always convert everything to APR so you're comparing apples to apples. And you don't have to go digging around in the dark for this stuff. There are some fantastic tools out there. You can go straight to lending protocols like Aave to find the base yield. Then you can check out platforms like Merkle to see what campaigns are running and when they end. And for a great big picture view,
DeFi Llama is just awesome for tracking yields across the whole ecosystem.
So, the key takeaway here is really simple. Read the yield, don't just chase it. Break down that big headline number into its 3 parts: base, emissions, and campaign. Always check those campaign end dates and use the tools we just talked about to check each layer for yourself. And of course, please remember, this is all for education to help you make smarter decisions. It's not financial advice. All of DeFi has risks.
So now you have the framework. You can look right past the flashy marketing and understand the real mechanics of any DeFi yield you come across. You can finally tell the difference between a short-term promotion and a truly sustainable return. So the question is, now that you